Richard Madeley's future on Good Morning Britain sealed, after ITV Bloodbath. ITV presenter Richard Madeley has been on Good Morning Britain since 2021, following the departure of Piers Morgan. Good Morning Britain host Richard Madeley has reportedly signed a short-term deal to stay on the ITV breakfast show. The 69-year-old initially joined the program in 2021 following Piers Morgan's departure. According to Mail Online, they have claimed that Madeley has agreed to a 6-month contract that is to begin in September. They also reported that it comes as part of a temporary arrangement while ITV reviews its presenter lineup. They also reported that lead presenter Susanna Reid is the only anchor guaranteed a longer-term deal. It follows the news that ITV will undergo a drastic reshuffle in January 2026 in a bid to save millions, with bosses trimming shows such as Lorraine to just 30 minutes. A source told The Sun, Richard is one of the biggest names on the show, but even he hasn't been offered a long-term deal. He's signed for 6 more months and will then reconsider how the show looks. As things stand, almost every prominent face on the show is in talks. Some are going to go in the reshuffle, so it will depend on who rates well with focus groups and how much money each of them is insisting on. Express Online has contacted representatives of Richard Madeley for comment. ITV said, "We don't comment on individual contracts, but we have always said that we intend to keep our daytime shows familiar to our audience. Good Morning Britain viewers can expect to see the presenting lineup that they know and love on screen once the proposed changes to production and scheduling take place in 2026. It follows the announcement earlier this year that Lorraine and Loose Women have had their usual time slots slashed in a brutal move from ITV, which comes into effect in January 2026. In the new daytime schedule, Lorraine will no longer hold its usual hour-long 9 a.m. slot and will instead run from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. on a seasonal basis for 30 weeks of the year. What's more, Loose Women will continue to air for 1 hour from 12:30 p.m., but again on a seasonal basis for 30 weeks of the year. According to Mail Online, they claimed that Loose Women is set to scrap their live audience due to budget cuts. When Express UK approached for comment about the show changes, a source replied, "While there is a proposal to not have a studio audience for Loose Women from 2026, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll never have a studio audience again, it just won't be in the same way as it is now. At this stage, we are still exploring new ways of working and producing the show when we move to a new studio next year." It was the kind of morning television moment that leaves viewers clutching their coffee cups, jaws dropped. On what began as an ordinary weekday broadcast, Good Morning Britain was thrown into chaos when tensions behind the scenes reportedly exploded, and at the center of the storm was none other than Richard Madeley. What some insiders are calling a studio bloodbath may well have sealed the veteran presenter's fate on the flagship ITV show. 4 years, Richard has been one of Good Morning Britain's most divisive figures, adored for his old-school charm by some, and criticized for his unpredictable, sometimes confrontational interviews by others. But sources close to the production say the latest incident has left ITV bosses questioning whether his time on the sofa has finally come to an end. A morning like no other. The tension was palpable even before the cameras rolled. Viewers may have noticed Richard's slightly clipped tone as he opened the show beside co-host Susanna Reid. It began innocently enough, a fiery debate about government accountability, but the conversation spiraled quickly. According to one crew member, "You could tell Richard was agitated. He'd had a meeting with producers before going on air, and something clearly rattled him." Within the first hour, he had already clashed with 2 guests, both high-profile political commentators who accused him of pushing an agenda. Susanna tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground, but Richard, visibly frustrated, refused to let it go. "It's my job to ask tough questions," he snapped at one point, prompting an awkward silence in the studio. Social media lit up instantly. Viewers were divided. Some praised him for his fiery stance, others called his behavior unprofessional and embarrassing. One viewer posted, "Richard Madeley seems one meltdown away from walking off set." Another added, "This feels like a live implosion." The breaking point. By the second hour of the broadcast, things had gone from tense to explosive. When a pre-recorded segment failed to play correctly, Richard was heard muttering under his breath, but microphones picked it up. The remark, reportedly aimed at the production team, was not one ITV wanted aired. Producers immediately cut to an ad break. When the show returned, Richard's seat was empty. For several minutes, Susanna continued solo, delivering headlines with a kind of icy calm that only comes from years in live television. Eventually, cameras caught a brief shot of Richard returning to the desk, clearly flustered, his usual composure nowhere in sight. Behind the scenes, according to an insider, a furious row had broken out between Richard and senior producers. It was a bloodbath, the source claimed. Richard felt undermined and blamed the team for making him look foolish on air. Voices were raised. People were told to leave the control room. It was chaos. A divided studio. In the aftermath, the GMB crew were reportedly split down the middle. Some sympathized with Richard, saying he had been pushed too far and unfairly scapegoated for production issues. Others felt his behavior had crossed a line. "He's brilliant when he's on form," one staffer admitted. "But when things go wrong, he can be very hard to handle." Even Susanna Reid, who has worked with Richard for years, seemed shaken. While she remained professional on camera, insiders say she later expressed frustration about being left to hold the fort during the meltdown. "She's used to dealing with strong personalities," one source said, "but this was different. You could tell she was genuinely uncomfortable." By midday, ITV's corridors were buzzing with rumors. A hastily arranged crisis meeting was held with senior executives, and discussions reportedly centered on whether Richard's position had become untenable. "He's a household name, but that doesn't make him untouchable," one insider explained. The show has been trying to move towards a calmer, more balanced tone, and this morning was the exact opposite. Officially, ITV declined to comment on internal matters, but a spokesperson issued a carefully worded statement. Good Morning Britain is a live program, and lively debate is part of its appeal. The team are focused on delivering engaging and respectful journalism to our viewers. However, off the record, several sources claim Richard has been asked to take time away to reflect, language that many interpret as a soft dismissal. "It's like when a football manager is told to take gardening leave," a producer quipped. "We all know what that means." Richard's side of the story. So far, Richard himself has remained publicly silent. But friends close to the 68-year-old presenter insist he's been unfairly portrayed. "Richard cares deeply about good journalism," one confidant told the Mirror. "He's passionate, he pushes hard, and sometimes that ruffles feathers. But he'd never deliberately cause chaos. He's old school, he believes in holding people to account." Yet even some of his defenders admit that Good Morning Britain has changed since Richard first joined. "It's not the show it was," said one former producer. "It's faster, edgier, and much more politically charged. Richard's style can seem out of step with that. He's a broadcaster from another era, and that's both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness." The aftermath. By evening, online speculation had reached fever pitch. Hashtags like #GMB Meltdown and #Richard Madeley Exit trended across social platforms. Fans flooded comment sections with mixed reactions, some begging ITV not to let him go, others suggesting it was time for fresh faces. In an ironic twist, ratings for the episode soared, the controversy drawing in millions who wanted to see what all the fuss was about. But insiders say that while the spike may look good on paper, ITV executives are more concerned about the show's long-term reputation. "They don't want GMB turning into a circus," one insider said. "The balance between entertainment and credibility is fragile, and today, that balance was shattered." What's next for Richard Madeley? If reports are to be believed, Richard's immediate future at Good Morning Britain is uncertain. Some insiders say he'll be rested for a few weeks, replaced by rotating presenters while the dust settles. Others believe his exit is all but confirmed. His contract renewal was already under discussion, one executive reportedly confided. "After this morning, it's hard to see ITV taking that risk again. They want stability, and Richard, for all his charisma, has become unpredictable." Still, few doubt that Richard will land on his feet. With decades of broadcasting experience, he remains one of Britain's most recognizable television personalities. Rumors suggest he may pivot to a documentary series, or even a new podcast that allows him to speak freely, away from the constraints of morning television. A legacy of controversy. Whether this marks the end of Richard Madeley's GMB career or just another dramatic chapter, one thing is certain. His impact on British breakfast television is undeniable. From his sometimes awkwardly candid interviews to his fearless questioning, Richard has always walked the fine line between controversy and authenticity.